is a story for anyone who may one day have to care for a loved one or need care themselves. If you think you've got all your affairs in order, think again. Tonight, Contact 13 Chief Investigator Darcy Spears shines a spotlight on a system some say is tearing families apart.
Terry Black always planned to be there for her father, Del Mancarelli. Little did she know she and her husband would have to fight to care for Del.
This has been one of the most difficult experiences of my life.
That's saying a lot for someone who lost her mother to a brain tumor. Knowing that tragedy can strike at any time, they began to put Dad's estate in order.
He put me on all of his bank accounts, made me the executrix of his will.
But it turned out that wouldn't be enough. Family Court Judge Charles Hoskin explains the wording many people don't know they need.
That they put an estate plan in place or designate that if I'm in need of a guardian, this is who I'd like to have done.
Del's journey into guardianship began when he moved to Las Vegas in 2002 to live with his longtime companion, Helen Natko. Years later, he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's and his health took a turn for the worse. In 2013, Terry noticed several withdrawals from his account, adding up to $220,000.
You know, something did not look right. My dad did not write checks for $50,000.
They flew in from their home state of North Carolina to help, only to find themselves shut out by Helen.
And she just said, "You're not going to see him. He's staying here."
The Blacks tried calling police, but learned they'd have to apply for guardianship of Del through the courts.
If it's believed that you are no longer capable of caring for yourself physically or financially, a family court judge can declare you a ward of the state and appoint a guardian who gets control over every aspect of your life, including your money.
People who are wards of the state have fewer rights and access to fewer resources than prisoners who are convicted of the most heinous crimes.
Attorney Rob Graham specializes in estate and guardianship cases. He argues the system intended to protect people puts them in a very vulnerable position.
Is there too much power floating around here being given to guardians that can come in and take complete control of your life, your money, your choices?
Too much power. There's sufficient power, hopefully.
The Blacks feel powerless in Del's case, particularly because Nevada has a home state rule, meaning you can't apply to be someone's guardian if you don't live in Nevada.
It's very difficult to manage somebody's affairs from a distance.
They sought local help, but Del's companion Helen filed for guardianship too, so the court appointed a temporary guardian who took control of Del's estate.
That the court that you think is there to protect you, to protect your loved one, it's called family court. The court completely denied our family any rights.
We're trying to protect the ward. And a lot of times that's going to cause someone else in that spectrum to feel like they weren't dealt with correctly.
The Blacks sure do. Terry even had to ask permission from the court-appointed guardian for something as basic as dinner alone with her dad.
And I was told, you will not be able to remove your dad from the home and take him to dinner.
Terry and Rick say that began a campaign to discredit them, isolate Del, and rack up charges to his estate. Under state law, the court-appointed guardian is paid with the ward's money. Every time Terry called or emailed for any reason, her father was billed as the system drained Del's money to fight his own daughter.
It's difficult, and I think that ultimately the process is too expensive.
But here's the kicker in Del's case.
There was criminal action here presented to the family court that they ignored.
Remember all the money withdrawn from Del's bank? The Blacks reported that to authorities who investigated and criminally charged Helen Natko with felony exploitation, alleging she took tens of thousands of dollars from Del for her own use. Natko has not entered a plea. The Blacks provided evidence she lost thousands of dollars gambling and told the family court she was under criminal investigation. Despite that, the court gave guardianship over Del to Helen. And that hasn't changed even though she's been charged. While many say that makes it clear the system is broken, Judge Hoskin argues.
I have 8,500 active guardianship cases, and I only have a very few that are disgruntled. And I think that's a very positive spin on what's going on in our system.
We reached out to Helen Natko and her attorney, but both declined to go on camera. They pointed to the family court's final decision, which found Dell too medically fragile to move. And despite the pending criminal case, family court didn't find any evidence that money was misused. Darcy Spears, Channel 13, Action News.
Mistake, misunderstanding, or intention to mislead, no matter what, one man's life was dramatically changed forever. Tonight, Contact 13 Chief Investigator Darcy Spears shows us how a system intended to guard and protect could be causing more harm than good.
When you look at Jason Hansen, you might think he can't take care of himself.
Do you video game a lot?
But when you talk to him,
I'm clearly lucid. I'm very intelligent.
you learn otherwise.
Someone needs to speak up. Someone needs to take a stand.
Jason is speaking out about what happened to him in adult guardianship court, a system Contact 13 discovered he never should have been caught up in.
I'm perfectly mentally capable, except for the fact that I have cerebral palsy.
While in the guardianship system, Jason lost his house and was placed in a group home at taxpayers' expense after his father passed away. Jason was involved in a guardianship when he was a child, but court officials say that ended in 2007 when he turned 18. No petition for appointment of an adult guardian has ever been filed, but that didn't keep the court from ruling on his case for most of his adult life.
When Contact 13 started asking questions, the court started admitting errors, like accepting filings after they'd lost jurisdiction, which they call unfortunate. As for treating Jason as an adult ward, they say they don't know whether that was a series of clerical errors or misunderstandings by the attorneys or an intention to mislead the court.
We would prefer not to be involved in people's lives.
Family Court Judge Charles Hoskin.
I can tell you that if a guardianship is not necessary, then it does go out of the system. We do dismiss it.
In Jason's case, no one caught it for 7 years until Contact 13 got involved and the case was suddenly closed. While it was open, private guardian and former Clark County Public Administrator Jared Schaefer was appointed trustee from July 2009 through January 2014. A special needs trust was created so Jason could qualify for Social Security benefits.
I never asked for Jared Schaefer to be appointed. He was court appointed.
Schaefer is currently the subject of a federal lawsuit accusing him of embezzlement, fraud, racketeering, and negligence in another case where he was the guardian. In Jason's case, court documents show Schaefer's company, Professional Fiduciary Services of Nevada, got $3,354 for trustee fees plus $300 for sales expenses. Another $4,000 was charged, again as sales expenses, but with no record of who got the money. The court has no explanation, and they say no one objected at the time.
I feel like there should have been someone fighting for me, and there clearly wasn't.
Contact 13 also found private guardian Patience Bristol billed Jason for case management, nearly $1,000 in 2010. Bristol, who worked for Schaefer's company for years, is currently in prison for stealing over $200,000 from other people she was assigned to protect.
She was vetted. She met the statutory requirements. She understood how to get away for a period of time with what she was doing.
Jason says he tried to fight for the right to fix up his dad's home, pay off a line of credit, and move back in, but he was told that was impossible and never given a chance. Court records show the house was worth $170,000 when his dad died in 2008, but county records show Schaefer sold it for $47,000 in 2010. After fees and expenses, records show as of 2013 only about $6,000 remaining in the trust Schaefer managed for Jason.
Did you get lost in this system, or you think it's more sinister than that?
I don't know if I got lost in the system or if it was more underhanded than that, but the system definitely needs to change.
The Court Compliance Office is taking another look at Jason's case to see whether the orders entered after he turned 18 should be set aside. As for Jared Schaefer, when we contacted him about this case, he referred us to court documents and hung up on us. Darcy Spears, Channel 13, Action News.
Frightening and plagued by problems. That's how county commissioners described our family court guardianship system in a first-of-its-kind hearing this morning. It comes in the wake of a Contact 13 investigation into alleged guardianship abuses. Chief Investigator Darcy Spears tells us why county leaders say drastic changes needed now.
Gandhi once said, "The measure of a society is how it treats the vulnerable." You are failing the elderly in Clark County.
Family members, concerned citizens, and representatives from Metro and District Court painted what commissioners called a frightening picture of the system that's supposed to protect the most vulnerable.
I'm a little concerned. I have a 96-year-old dad that seems very healthy to me, but I wouldn't want a guardian to get a hold of him.
When someone is deemed unable to care for themselves, family court can make them a ward and appoint a private, for-profit guardian instead of allowing family members to care for their loved ones.
Because once a guardian has been appointed, they literally become that person. They take over everything they own, their bank account, their trust account, their stock portfolio, everything they have.
Elizabeth Indig says that's what happened to her mother.
And she should be at home. She had a home. She had her things. Every time I visit her, she says either bring her home or kill her.
In 2012, Indig says her mother fell in her driveway, went to the hospital, and then to a rehab facility before she was supposed to come home.
With no notification or discussion, a woman named April Parks was granted guardianship of my mother by Commissioner John Norheim with nobody in attendance because I, the only daughter, was never served and had no idea of the hearing.
There are 8,650 guardianship cases in Clark County. Between 2,500 and 3,000 of them are active, and all are being heard by one man, Hearing Master John Norheim. Metro has been getting complaints about how Norheim deals with family members.
He ignores their testimony or doesn't allow them to speak. He won't hold an evidentiary hearing, and then he makes a ruling and it goes to a private guardian.
Homes can be sold for pennies on the dollar. Private guardians can drain wards' bank accounts, and there's no oversight aside from family court Chief Judge Charles Hoskin.
The complaints we get from the citizens is that then Judge Hoskins will rubber stamp it and say Norheim made appropriate decisions, or Judge Hoskins doesn't hear the family's complaint.
Neither Norheim nor Hoskin attended the commission meeting. Commissioner Susan Brager called them, quote, little gods making decisions they shouldn't, end quote. District Court Chief Judge David Barker acknowledged long-standing problems with the guardianship system.
And so we need to make sure we can identify those who are most vulnerable, protect them, and hold those who might be taking advantage of them to account.
Commissioner Chris Giunciliani said abusive private guardians need to be prosecuted and family members and finances should be returned to their loved ones. County leaders also said, based on what they've heard, Guardianship Commissioner Norheim needs to go.
A lot of them didn't realize this was going on, and yeah, I think something's finally going to be done.
Commission Chairman Steve Sisolak will create a blue ribbon panel to audit guardianship cases, and Chief Judge Barker is working to get a guardianship compliance officer to independently review guardianship cases and help frustrated family members. In the newsroom, Darcy Spears, Channel 13, Action News.
The family court spokesperson says they take the concerns raised regarding the handling of guardianship cases very seriously. They say they'll work to bring Clark County in line with the national model and improve the handling of guardianship cases.
Just weeks after a Contact 13 investigation, the Nevada Attorney General is hearing from families who believe they've been victimized by a court that's supposed to protect the most vulnerable. Contact 13 Chief Investigator Darcy Spears has more on who's now getting involved.
Darcy, they're being torn apart.
That's what Rick Black says of families caught up in Clark County's guardianship system. It's something he and his wife Terry have been shouting from the rooftops for years.
This has been one of the most difficult experiences of my life.
After Contact 13 first aired their story in February, they say someone is finally listening to their allegations of elder abuse and exploitation. They've talked to the sheriff's office and met with the district attorney.
If they don't get involved in it at that point and they don't, pick up the ball and roll with it, then he at the Attorney General's office would look into and review the matter.
They're hoping the Attorney General's office will hear from more families who've tried and failed to get help from local authorities.
This isn't an isolated case. I've interviewed over 32 families that have lost over $16 million over the last 5 years, and they never got the chance to protect their loved ones. This court consistently removes those wards from family and drains those estates.
Guardianship is when somebody can't take care of themselves physically or financially, so they become a ward of the state. In family court, a person is appointed and essentially given control over all aspects of the ward's money and life. Terry's father, Del Mancarelli, is caught up in the system.
Terry's dad didn't want, at this point, 65 to 70% of his estate to be wasted in less than a year and given to third-party guardians, lawyers.
Del's court-appointed guardian has been criminally charged with misusing his money, but the family court has left her in charge. Terry wants to take her dad back home to North Carolina and wants the court to stop fighting her efforts to care for him.
Terry and her father have had the most respectful, loving relationship that I've ever seen in my lifetime. And to think that someone, a stranger, can jump in and say, well, that isn't what he wanted, even though all of his documents said that's what he wanted.
We spoke to family court judge Charles Hoskin in February.
We're trying to protect the ward. And a lot of times that's going to cause someone else in that spectrum to feel like they weren't dealt with correctly.
The Blacks are also taking their concerns to state lawmakers. Proposed bills to address alleged guardianship system failures could be introduced before the end of this month. Terry and Rick say the Attorney General's interest and lawmakers' actions are the first sign of hope after a years-long emotional battle.
And it is something I don't want another Clark County resident or person in this country to go through.
If you believe you have evidence of guardianship system abuses, we would like to hear about it. Send us an email to 13investigates@ktnv.com and go to our website to see my previous stories and for more information on how to get your evidence to law enforcement. In the newsroom, Darcy Spears, Channel 13 Action News.
The Clark County Family Court responded to Action News about this story, saying the court is mindful of any and all concerns regarding guardianship cases and the well-being of wards. The court is constantly exploring better ways to monitor guardian compliance. However, we are prohibited from conducting investigations. If the legislature chooses to revise any statutes, the court will apply them once they become law.
Steve and Tricia, commissioners are wondering why it took the media to shed light on the seemingly unchecked power of our guardianship system. But since we've exposed how the system tears families apart, we are seeing results. County leaders looked at the problem for the second time today after a series of our reports showed how the system that's supposed to protect our most vulnerable can sometimes do more harm than good. In some cases, entire life savings were spent with no oversight. District Court Chief Judge David Barker told commissioners it's critical that people have trust and confidence in the system families say is out of control.
The message is clear that they've been heard. We understand what their issues have been, issues that they raised. We're concerned about those. They've got our attention. It's been elevated to the highest level it can in the state of Nevada, which is the Nevada Supreme Court, to address those issues.
In the meantime, our reports have generated a flood of response. Here's a look at what some of our viewers are saying. One says, I can also tell you of another person who has had a similar and more frightening story. Another writes, the problems are much deeper. Another says, thank you for bringing this to light for everyone. And a fourth viewer writes, the story you just released about guardianship, I went through it with my mother in California. Coming up at 6:30, the frightening tale we first reported last night of a Valley family who says the system has torn them apart and how Contact 13 caught a private guardian red-handed, double-dipping and draining a couple's money. In the studio, Darcy Spears, Channel 13 Action News.
The story you're about to see will make you sad. It will make you feel scared and helpless, and it could happen to anyone. It is a family tragedy where an elderly couple is yanked from their home. Their daughter is left in the dark, and the person put in charge by Clark County admits to serious mistakes uncovered by Contact 13 Chief Investigator Darcy Spears.
It can happen in the blink of an eye.
I could not be less happy.
Life as you know it changed forever.
Did you feel like you and your wife were kidnapped out of your own home?
We were kidnapped and raped. Both.
Maybe not literally, but Rudy and Rennie North feel like they were violated, stripped of the life they were living together for 60 years. He cared for her through cancer and claims they were doing just fine until a knock on their door in the fall of 2013.
So I opened the door, and they said that they were officers of the court.
Rudy says the officers gave the couple 3 options.
1, we call the police. 2, we have you go to a psychiatric ward.
Choice 3, an assisted living facility. The people who came for Rudy and Rennie were private professional guardian April Parks and a member of her staff.
Mr. and Mrs. North were not in a good situation when we initially got the guardianship. There were lots of concerns about what was going on with them health-wise.
Parks says a hospice company referred the couple to her out of concern that they could no longer care for themselves.
Were they allowed to given the choice to stay in their home?
At that time, they were not.
And they've never been allowed to go back home. Parks says threats of police and jail never came up, but
psychiatric ward probably came up.
Frightened and worried about being separated, the couple went with Parks to Lakeview Terrace Senior Home. Their only daughter, Julie, had no idea they'd been taken.
Who believes they're going to get taken out of their home?
Julie eventually tracked them down. She took this video in January 2014.
Oh, I felt like I was being arrested. I was kidnapped out of my house. I wasn't even fully dressed.
Court records show Rudy and Rennie were deemed incompetent by a pain management specialist and a physician's assistant. April Parks used those evaluations to gain temporary guardianship, which the court has since made permanent.
In the court record, Parks also calls their only daughter, Julie, a reported drug addict who has no contact with her parents. Both say that's a lie, and there's no evidence to back it up.
They defame your family. They do that in case after case after case.
In the North's case, we discovered mistakes, overbilling, and double dipping.
Should it take Contact 13 to be the one that's finding this stuff and asking these questions?
No, ma'am, it shouldn't.
That's scary when you're in charge of someone else's life and money.
Yes, I'm not happy.
This shouldn't be happening.
I agree with you.
Shockingly, Parks sold a bunch of Rudy and Rennie's belongings through an estate sale company who made $4,150, but she only got $923, which went into the North's account. Court records show Parks said it wasn't worth the legal effort to pursue the other $3,200.
But why would that ever be the determination?
Well, I'm not,
this is someone else's money.
You're right.
She says they're going to pursue it now. Contact 13 also uncovered double dipping. Rudy and Rennie were charged $780 each for court filings and travel time to court on the same days in 2013.
That's over $1,500.
You're absolutely right.
To this couple.
You're absolutely right.
Who you're saying doesn't have enough money already.
We will happily reverse those charges out.
How about $108 Parks charged Rennie to buy her a pair of stretch pants?
Does $108 for stretch pants seem
No,
reasonable?
it doesn't. And I'm happy to reverse that.
So far, Parks and her lawyer have charged the couple more than $25,000 in fees, plus almost $50,000 has been spent for the couple's room and board and medical expenses. Parks says this is the first time she's hearing Rudy and Rennie are unhappy and want out.
I was dealing in fear because, again, I didn't know that. I thought Nazi Germany was done in 1946. I didn't know it still existed in America.
April Parks also told us that guardians are officers of the court, but the court says that's not true. The North family is scheduled to bring their case back to court later this month as they fight to reunite and end the guardianship. We will be following that case. Darcy Spears, Channel 13, Action News.
More action is being taken by the state.
Contact 13 Chief Investigator Darcy Spears is joining us to explain why one court-appointed guardian has been stricken from a state agency's list. Darcy.
Steve, you won't find private for-profit guardian April Parks in the directory published by the State Division of Aging and Disability Services. At least you won't find her there anymore. The state agency removed Parks from their resource list after Contact 13 found her double-dipping and draining a couple's money. The state offers seniors and their families a variety of resources on this website, Nevada Care Connection. April Parks was included in the directory as a professional guardian, but today we learned that after reviewing our reports and doing some legwork of their own, the state decided to take Parks off their list. In the bigger picture, families frustrated with Parks or any private guardian now have a new resource to help them navigate the system. Yesterday, we told you about a recently created hotline with Clark County District Court. It was set up to take complaints about guardianship cases. Today, the acting guardianship compliance officer told us what callers are saying.
They generally relate to procedural matters as to whether or not certain required documentation was filed or whether it was filed timely, and other complaints relate to the substance of the accounting, that is, the manner in which the ward's funds are being utilized.
About a half dozen calls were logged at the hotline in just the past 2 weeks. The hotline number is 702-671-4614, and the email is guardianshipcompliance@clarkcountycourts.us. We, of course, have all that information posted for you on our website at ktnv.com. In the studio, Darcy Spears, Channel 13 Action News.
Darcy, thank you.
Did a county hearing master spout false information in court to scare a family trying to care for their loved one?
That's what Contact 13 Chief Investigator Darcy Spears is asking, and she is taking her questions all the way to the top.
Each hearing, they ignore my petitions and do absolutely nothing.
Several families feel they're getting run over when trying to protect a loved one. They say hearing master John Norheim is at the wheel.
Guardianship abuse has been going on here for over 20 years. Commissioner Norheim just refined the process.
County commissioners heard concerns and wanted action.
So that maybe we need to move this Norheim. If he's under your control, that might be the first move you make when you leave here this morning.
I think Commissioner Collins is absolutely correct. I would be getting rid of Mr. Nord, whatever, now, and put into effect some individuals that actually will work with the families.
That was 4 weeks ago, and Norheim is still on the bench. We sat down with Chief District Court Judge David Barker to ask why.
What about the calls to remove Norheim?
I understand the calls. I understand the case type. I will make decisions. We will make decisions that are consistent with an efficient operation of the guardianship program.
Contact 13 has seen firsthand how Norheim operates in the case of Del Mancarelli.
I would never do, Your Honor, anything inhumane to my father.
Terry Black is fighting to get her father back to North Carolina. To do that, she planned to transition him through Aegis-assisted living. But listen to this from a hearing last March as Norheim spouts scare tactics about what he says is her and Aegis's plan.
Aegis would send over typically 3 to 4 medical techs, big burly guys. They would go over to Ms. Natko's house. They would subdue your father. That is, they would take him to the ground. They would tie up his hands and his feet. They would inject him with a combination. They call it a B-52. They would then strap him to a gurney, 5-point restraints, including a belly restraint, hands and feet. They would then take him to Aegis, where he would be in a padded cell for a minimum of 3 days, up to a year, until he could be made docile enough to be transported to North Carolina.
This sounds like it's something rehearsed. We never made plans for IVs to be shot in Dad's arm and strapped to a gurney.
And each time she tried to explain that to Norheim, he steamrolled on and didn't let her talk.
The doctors tell me, all of the doctors tell me this is not medically appropriate, and breaking him by putting him in isolation and chemical restraints.
That is not that is not the plan.
We contacted Aegis, who flat out deny the procedures Norheim described. In fact, it's against state law. Assisted living facilities cannot use chemical or physical restraints or lock a resident in a room.
I am appalled that a commissioner who's assigned to adjudicate on these kind of matters would make that up with no evidence.
We asked Chief Judge Barker to watch the hearing video with us.
Frankly, I'm not going to get down into the case.
He did allow us to read him a transcript.
What you described to me is troubling.
Barker says guardianship cases are very difficult and claims Norheim is trying to do what's best for the wards. As for the facts,
any judicial officer should know of what they speak.
And at this point, are there any plans to do anything differently, or
everything is on the table?
Aegis reached out to Commissioner Norheim to correct his misinformation, but they say he never responded to their letter or multiple phone calls. After our interview with Judge Barker, the court opened its own investigation, and we are awaiting their report. In the newsroom, Darcy Spears, Channel 13, Action News.
Major upheaval sweeps through Clark County's controversial guardianship system.
Now, reports from Contact 13 Chief Investigator Darcy Spears are getting action from the top.
What you did, frankly, is help push this to the front burner.
Contact 13's investigations into Clark County guardianships sounded the alarm that something needed to be done to overhaul the system.
Gandhi once said, "The measure of a society is how it treats the vulnerable." You are failing the elderly in Clark County.
Guardianships are legal proceedings where people are deemed unable to care for themselves. They lose their liberty, and the court gives control over their lives, their money, and their assets to another person. It's a process that should have strict safeguards and oversight, but that's not the way it's been going in Clark County.
Is the system broken? From that perspective, no. Can we do things better? Yes.
There are 892 open adult guardianship cases in Clark County, with an average of 15 new filings per month. And until today, one man, Hearing Master John Norheim, presided over every single case. This administrative order filed today takes all guardianship cases away from Norheim, transferring them to experienced family court judge Diane Steele. The reassignment is just the first step in a fast-moving process aimed at improving the system.
You helped us in that process by bringing this to the attention of those who are interested, the commissioners. And so you helped me in that, and I thank you for it.
Well, let's shake on that, right?
Okay.
Good partnership.
And we're going to move forward. We're going to make this better.
Reaction is already pouring in from families affected by the guardianship system. Ronna Goodman writes, "There is indeed a light at the end of the tunnel for seniors and their families that have been caught in this terrible nightmare. We hope that this is just the beginning of reversing the guardianship scandal that has plagued our senior community." And this from Julie Belshi, whose parents have been under guardianship for almost 2 years. She writes, "After losing faith in our family court legal system for the last 2 years, today is the best news ever. Our family is overjoyed and overwhelmed."
This petition was also filed today in the Nevada Supreme Court. It asks for a commission to be created to study Nevada guardianships and address critical problems. They're asking for a report and recommendations by the end of this year. In the studio, Darcy Spears, Channel 13, Action News.
Darcy Spears has a story of loved ones liberated from Clark County's controversial guardianship system.
That is an enormous problem. That is no technical problem. That is a big, enormous, major problem.
That's Guardianship Commissioner John Norheim just before he took private for-profit guardian April Parks off the case of Rudy and Rennie North.
What that means is that she will not have any authority from this court to act on behalf of your mom and dad.
Guardianship was given instead to daughter Julie Belshi, who's been fighting to get her parents out of the system for nearly 2 years.
And what happened today was completely amazing. More than thrilled with his decision to let me actually take over and be part of my parents' life again.
Nearly 2 years ago, Rudy and Rennie North were enjoying a quiet, loving life together. But all that changed with a knock on the door.
I felt like I was being arrested. I was kidnapped out of my house.
And we were put in a car and driven away. My wife kept saying, "Please just leave my home."
Since the fall of 2013, the court has allowed April Parks to control every aspect of Rudy and Rennie's lives, where they would live, how their money was spent, what items they could keep, and sometimes who they could see.
They took my parents. I didn't know who.
I didn't know what.
Julie has been fighting for her parents ever since. When Contact 13 looked at the guardianship case, we found mistakes, overcharging, and double billing by April Parks. Our findings played a key role in Wednesday morning's hearing.
They said she's costing me $300 an hour to sit here and degrade me and my family. I will not stand for it, and I will not pay for it.
Parks' attorney did the talking for her, claiming the process to remove Parks is being rushed.
Based on innuendo, based on hearsay, based on salacious representations made on the media about Ms. Parks, this matter is turning into a witch hunt.
But hearing Master Norheim was having none of it.
The idea that she's been compliant, not even close.
Norheim said Parks failed to protect the Norths and, especially, their estate.
She's supposed to block the money and she's supposed to come to court for release. That didn't happen. It got spent.
Right.
Things got sold.
Right.
None of that was supposed to happen.
Parks' attorney declined to comment after the hearing, and Parks herself didn't return our calls. Rudy says the journey down a rough road is one he can navigate now.
I believe it's the start. And if somebody came and said to me, Rudy, you just made the road smaller. It's no longer as long as it was.
Commissioner Norheim called this a real problem case and said it's been referred to the court compliance officer for investigation. An evidentiary hearing is scheduled for June 11th, and the court may impose sanctions. We're told the court intends to review all guardianship cases now for compliance. In the studio, Darcy Spears, Channel 13 Action News.
Tonight, new revelations about a private for-profit guardian who's gone out of the frying pan and into the fire. After being stripped of some power by Clark County District Court, April Parks is now under investigation by Boulder City Police. Darcy Spears exposes new allegations of fraud and misuse of funds by a woman said to be harming the people she's supposed to protect.
I get very upset because it starts out wrong and it ends up getting worse.
Julie Belshie recently won a hard-fought battle to get her parents back. Rudy and Rennie North were under the control of private guardian April Parks until Contact 13 exposed how she was double-dipping, overcharging, and misusing the couple's money.
That is an enormous problem. That is no technical problem. That is a big, enormous, major problem.
Parks was stripped of her control over the couple by the court, but it seems Rudy and Rennie aren't the only wards whose cases are raising red flags. Parks is now under investigation by Boulder City Police.
Because it's also our job to protect the elderly from mistreatment and exploitation.
The police investigation involves the Norths and other wards who April Parks placed here at Lakeview Terrace Assisted Living. The Norths wound up here after Parks knocked on the couple's door in 2013 and gave them 3 options.
1, we call the police. 2, we have you go to a psychiatric ward.
Or 3, go to Lakeview Terrace, which they chose in order to stay together and where they lived for almost a year and a half. Police say there's been a flurry of activity here by private professional guardian April Parks. Recently, she has moved 7 of her wards out of Lakeview Terrace, leaving behind a trail of unpaid bills to the tune of more than $20,000. A manager at the facility became concerned about the residents and notified police. According to the report, some were moved without notice, and neither Lakeview nor the authorities know where they are.
And some of these anomalies start popping up where you go, this is just not right, then we start to look at things a little bit deeper and take a little bit more aggressive stance on it.
Sergeant Aaron Johnson says the investigation is just beginning, but he believes it extends beyond Boulder City's borders.
As a matter of fact, we believe it is actually extended into the valley.
Meaning many more of Parks's wards could be affected. Julie Belshie worries about those who can't fight for themselves.
It's very emotional for me personally to look and see the people. It's not the money that she owes them, it's the people. These poor people have to go and they have to get moved again, and they owe money and they get served with an eviction notice or something when you're 90 years old. Do you want that to happen to you? I don't want it to happen to me.
We contacted April Parks for this story, but she hasn't returned our call. Lakeview Terrace, who helped notify authorities about Parks' actions, provided us with the statement. They say, in part, our management team was taken aback and saddened by the effects of Guardian April Parks and her actions on residents and families. We have their full statement on ktnv.com. We'll be following the case closely with police. Darcy Spears, Channel 13, Action News.
Also effective today, as a result of Darcy's investigations, all adult guardianship cases were transferred to family court judge Cynthia Diane Steele. Many families complained that the previous hearing master and judge were rubber stamping wrongdoing by private guardians and ignoring families. Valley families here in Southern Nevada have reason to celebrate tonight. Lawmakers have heard their voice. Contact 13's Chief Investigator Darcy Spears explains how a crucial change in guardianship law could keep families together.
The change isn't coming a moment too soon. Thousands of seniors move to Nevada to retire, and many want their relatives to take charge when they need help. But when we started investigating problems with the guardianship system nearly a year ago, we found Nevada residents who needed guardians weren't allowed to turn to an out-of-state relative, even if that person was named as guardian in estate planning papers. Instead, the person you trusted was required by law to find a local co-guardian. Families found fault with that because it goes against an individual's wishes and brings in outsiders. During our investigation, we found that could lead to fraud, exploitation, and often pushes family members out of the picture. As of today, Senate Bill 262 drops the residency requirement, so if you want your son or daughter who lives in California, Arizona, or any other state to take care of you, they'll be able to do so.
I am thrilled. There's been a huge outpouring of support for this, particularly from our senior citizen population, and I know that there are thousands of people who are awaiting the signature and passage of this bill so that they can have their minds put at ease that the individual of their choice will be able to care for them when that time comes.
Governor Sandoval signed the bill today. Also passed this session is a law that will require private professional guardians to be licensed and regulated by the state.
More action today following a Contact 13 investigation into Clark County's controversial guardianship system. The people who can take control of every aspect of your life and your money are now under a Supreme Court microscope. Our Contact 13 investigations have exposed serious problems plaguing the guardianship system. Darcy Spears uncovered elder exploitation, misuse of money, and lack of oversight. In response, the state's highest court has officially created a commission to study how guardianships are administered in Nevada's courts. Well, the goal? To help overhaul the system to increase accountability, documentation, tracking, and judicial training. A series of public hearings is expected with a final recommendation due to the Supreme Court by the end of December.
The local family says they are finally free at last from the county guardianship system. It's the latest development in a lengthy Contact 13 investigation that's given families a voice in a system where they were silenced. Here's Chief Investigator Darcy Spears.
And I thank
look
you
what
so
we
much.
did.
Yeah.
Hugs and tears outside family court after a guardianship hearing. That after Julie Belshie began the final steps in bringing her torn-apart family back together.
It's overwhelming for me. It really is. It's beyond words.
For her mother,
Just like a rope around my neck has been removed.
Julie's parents, Rudy and Rennie North, both showed up in court to fight for their freedom from private, for-profit guardian April Parks. Parks had previously been suspended from her control over the Norths, but Judge Cynthia Diane Steele made it permanent in a Thursday afternoon hearing.
I'm not seeing that they need anything immediately as far as a guardian is concerned. So
I'm continuing.
Parks was originally granted guardianship by hearing master John Norheim, who's no longer allowed to hear guardianship cases since Contact 13 exposed his questionable actions on the bench and lack of oversight. In Thursday's hearing, Judge Steele found Rennie should have never been caught up in all this.
So you don't really need a guardian?
True.
And so do you want a guardian?
No.
Okay. So
Rennie's guardianship was terminated. Julie will become guardian for her father. As for how this all began, Parks came into the couple's life in 2013 after hospice care workers raised concerns that they could no longer care for themselves. But Julie wasn't notified when Parks and a partner showed up at her parents' door.
They actually kidnapped us. from our house and told us we had to go. Otherwise, they were going to call the police, they were going to call the fire department, they were going to lock us up, and, I was frightened.
I'm sorry they feel like they're afraid of me, but I know that I've never done anything to make them afraid of me.
That was back in May when we first reported on the North's case. In that story, we exposed Parks double-dipping, overcharging, and misusing the couple's money.
The money that is spent by April Parks and some guardians is atrocious. There's no reason or rhyme. You charge somebody $100 to open their mail, or you go visit them and you spend $180 to go visit them and you bring them a case of water.
Rennie shared more concerns with the judge.
They took our car from us, so we don't have a car.
Also, a rare coin collection Parks was warned not to sell, and the judge questioned how much access Parks had to the North's bank accounts.
I don't see a blocked account in here, although I do see that there are some substantial assets. So there's no proof of blocked account in here. That's the concern.
Parks is now under investigation by Boulder City Police due to her actions with the Norths and other wards.
I want my money. We have no money. She took it all.
We caught up with Parks after court.
April, are you prepared to defend your actions? When we first spoke, you agreed that there had been some wrongdoing. Has there been more wrongdoing that you haven't admitted to?
She won't answer Contact 13, but we'll have to tell it to the judge. Rennie North has been set free from guardianship, but her money is still in limbo, so her family will still have to fight to get control of that. As for April Parks and whether she'll be held accountable for her alleged wrongdoing, that will go to trial. Darcy Spears, Channel 13, Action News.
I'm going to take the step of having Ms. Black be co-guardian of a person at this juncture.
Those words are more than music to Terry Black's ears.
It was what I hoped for. It was what I prayed for.
Her family has spent nearly $700,000 fighting the Clark County guardianship system over the past 2 years.
And today, for the first time in 2 years, our voices have finally been heard, and it's a big, big day for us.
An only child, Terry has been fighting for what should be simple, the ability to help take care of her own father, Del Mincarelli, who's been under a court-appointed guardianship since 2013.
It's a happy day. I can care for my father the way it was meant to be, the way that he desired, and the way that I told him I would.
Her reaction is a stark contrast to the one we got from Del's guardian, Helen Natko.
What are your feelings on sharing the guardianship? Why look at me and turn away? Don't you have something to say?
Natko said nothing after Judge Cynthia Diane Steele ordered her to share guardianship over Del with Terry. In another court, Natko is facing felony charges for fraud and exploitation of Del. Despite that, former guardianship hearing master John Norheim left Natko in charge of Del and his money.
But I do have some very grave concerns about things that have happened since that time.
In addition to Alzheimer's, Del has diabetes. He recently developed an infection shortly after Natko took him for a pedicure. Gangrene set in, and he's expected to lose most of his toes.
There's enough new concern going on with regard to the ward here that I am concerned for his health, primarily.
There's also concern that Natko may have removed Del from a recent hospital visit against medical advice.
Walking away from the camera doesn't look very good. Why not share your perspective?
Dan Foley is Natko's lawyer in both the guardianship and criminal cases.
If it would be in any way beneficial for my client to talk to the press, I would talk to the press. But it's not.
Terry and Rick Black can't stop talking about the change they're seeing in our guardianship system.
What has occurred in this courtroom is unbelievable. Well, now finally people are going to be held accountable to evidence, be held accountable to truth, and be held accountable to Nevada law. That hasn't happened in this court with wealthy adult guardianship contested cases in a long, long time.
Terry can help care for her dad, but Helen Natko is still in charge of his money. Natko is due to answer the criminal charges in a preliminary hearing in August, and Contact 13 will be there. Darcy Spears, Channel 13, Action News.